Gaming might seem like an unlikely place to start a payments revolution, but ZBD's André Neves explains why it's the perfect gateway to bring Bitcoin transactions to billions. This is Build with Bitcoin. As a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only. If you enjoy our content, please remember to subscribe, share, and comment, as this all helps us greatly.
This isn't for everyone. It's for the ones who know the old system is broken and are ready to build something that lasts. Welcome to the Build with Bitcoin podcast.
I'm co-host Israel Munoz, and joined with co-host Lynn Bairstow. Today, we welcome André Neves onto the podcast, CTO and co-founder of ZBD, a provider of Bitcoin native payment infrastructure. We have a lot to get into today, André. There's plenty to talk about your background, your experience co-founding ZBD, and all your technical background in the Lightning Network with Bitcoin payments, of this AI conversation that's happening with agents, your recent fundraise. So let's first set the stage. We'll have quite a bit to unpack in this conversation, but tell us a little bit about who you are, André. You come from Brazil. What got you into Bitcoin? Maybe a little bit of the backstory to get started.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Israel, Lynn, for having me over. So my journey, I'm originally from Brazil, and I currently live in the US, and I've been here for a little bit more than a decade. I had the privilege of coming here for university, and have stayed ever since. For me, Bitcoin became clearly something that I needed to devote a lot more of my personal time. When in 2014, my then roommate started talking about this new money online thing that you always, dismiss very quickly. And he just wouldn't stop talking about it. And at the time I was leading an engineering team in New York, and I realized, hey, I can try to send money to my family in Brazil, and I tested a transaction to my brother. And suddenly I realized that we actually finally had money at internet speed. And I said, wow, okay, this is something we need to be focusing on this, and that's sort of the big impetus that everyone has. Some people have the famous Slashdot article in 2011 or 2012. I have an interesting roommate who wouldn't stop talking about Bitcoin as my catalyst to come in. And that's the very beginning of it all in 2015.
Out of curiosity, Andre, the Lightning component, because that's, of course, core focus today, and you were very early on. If I'm not mistaken, also you were the creator of the Lightning addresses that are widely used by the industry. What clicked or, drew your attention on the payment side along the Bitcoin journey? When did the Lightning component come?
So it was interesting because Bitcoin, 2014 Bitcoin is very much the same in the sense that we have 10-minute block times and you have to wait for transactions to settle and so on. And so as a technologist, as a product builder, I immediately thought, if this isn't real time, like this is not going to go very far when it comes to payments. We could look at, larger back office movement of money as a potential, but if it's to be used as payment, it needed to become quite a bit more, it's the age of tap, right? So you get anywhere and you tap it and it's done for the end user experience. And so when Lightning came around in 2016 with the white paper, I dove quite a bit, as deep as I could. There's a little bit of cryptography that's above my pay grade, and quickly realized that the Lightning Network would enable it to become the day-to-day payment activity. Touching a little bit on Brazil's side, my folks have seen, I believe, 4 or 5 different monies in their lifetime. And so Bitcoin clicked very easily for them. And maybe because of that, it also clicked very easily for me. And then I think it was 2017, testnet Lightning came around and we did our very first transactions. And honestly, that was the big unlock for me. And I said, I've been developing products for the better half of 10 years at that point. And it was time to say, I want to build something with purpose, not just build something that, reaches a completion date and a delivery. And so Lightning really was that spark for me. In 2018, I had the privilege of being picked among 10 other folks to participate in the Chain Code Labs residency program. So this is one of the most, venerable companies, I guess, institutions in Bitcoin that support Bitcoin development and Bitcoin core developers. They have these teaching programs. So along with me was Pierre Rochard, who has gone on to do incredible things. Jack from Strike was there with us. We have folks from Bitrefill in the early days, and this was really the cream of the crop of Lightning teaching the next wave of Lightning developers. And so as soon as I finished that seminar program, I think it was a couple months, and I quit my cushy job. And I said, it's time to build something. The entrepreneurial mind just wouldn't stop talking. And so that was the impetus, and Lightning was the starting point for what eventually became ZBD.
And André, it sounds like the New York Bitcoin scene at that time was really interesting. I think it was one of the areas that, between the combination of coming from a background in LATAM where you had personal experience with a currency that was less stable than what you were exposed to in the US. I was living in Mexico at the time. I discovered it in early 2013 and had the same experience. It was like, it didn't take me the 10 touch points. It was immediate when you saw the pain points. How big was that community in New York? And is that where you met your co-founders of ZBD? What was it like there?
Yeah, so the community was, and it's biased take because I was part of that community. I think it was the best community at the best time. It was a sort of like a point in time in history where things were very special. We had BitDevs New York, which was, arguably the very first one. And so there was a very large developer community there, and led to a lot of super high quality, just development discussions around Bitcoin. We didn't stay very close to price discussions, which is very interesting. A lot of people talk about Bitcoin and they always talk about price. That was never the conversation. It was about how can we change the world? How can we improve this? How can we give people the ability to own their money? I had the privilege of being, running the BitDevs alongside two other folks in New York for almost 2 years. And so that really pushed me to be at the forefront of everything Lightning. In front of me, were sitting, Peter Willa, Sipa, et cetera. And you had like the individuals writing the BIPs, Matt Corallo. So it leveled me up, and it, I think, leveled everyone up in that space. So every month, hundreds of people would get together for this. It was like a mini conference. And it was through this community that I met with my co-founders, Simon and Chris. So this is actually a funny story. I tried to fundraise sort of with a different founding team for a slightly different product, in the early days of 2018. Lightning was too early. There wasn't a lot of, investment desire to deploy capital into Lightning. And so we didn't pursue it. And then lo and behold, I want to say maybe a month or two after that, someone from that community reached out and said, "Hey, you should meet this guy called Simon Cowell." And we all looked as, there's a famous person called Simon Cowell. And he said, "No, not this one, the Bitcoin one." And he was based in London, and he came to me and he said, "Hey, I have this great idea. What if we put Bitcoin and games in the platform?" And I said, "Hey man, that is my idea. Let's talk," he brought on Chris Moss aboard. That's our third co-founder. So Chris comes from the gaming development background. He had the very first Bitcoin game ever deployed in 2013. Simon comes from the financial services background, and I come from the product and engineering background. So the three of us create this tripod that's now become ZBD.
Well, that's a great segue into maybe what ZBD does exactly and the gaming industry. So you guys, since founding ZBD in 2019, André, have raised to date a little over 86 million is my understanding, with a recent Series C fundraising that you disclosed just short few weeks ago of 40 million. So you guys have done some spectacular growth in what, of course, you believe to be an untapped market and an industry that can sometimes be misunderstood and unknown to many people, which is gaming. Of course, I think your vision is broader than just gaming, but can you give us maybe just a quick overview of exactly what ZBD does within the gaming industry and why you view it as such a massive market for payments?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess I'll start with the problem, right? The market, the industry right now, and has been, gaming is a 60-plus-year-old industry when it comes to video games. And it's an industry that has not evolved with the evolution of money and payments. So money has always been on the edges of a game. You can buy into a game, whether it's an asset or a sword or a points, right? And you sometimes have the ability to win something at the end of the game, but that's, potentially just points in the game, right? Money was never truly inside of the game. When you play, Counter-Strike, when you play GTA and so on, you have dollar terms, you have valued items, but there's no money actually happening. And that's because gaming evolved separate from the technology of money. ZBD is coming to resolve that, right? So we are a native payment service provider, globally distributed, primarily focusing on our tier one markets of US and Europe. We're a regulated custodian, so that means we have all of the licensing to be able to provide developers and platforms the ability to money move in, out, and around, right? So if they want to take in funds through a card, if they want to accept money at a web store, if they want a user to be able to trade inside of a game with another user, you need to have money capabilities. The current industry deals mostly around what's known as merchant of record. So it's basically, someone that can do the reselling for you. So a good example is something like a web store, right? You have a game and you want to sell some items to a user, you would use a merchant of record. But that is the interaction and that's the end of it. You come in, you do an Apple Pay payment, for example, and the end of the interaction. That's the only one-to-one money piece there. What ZBD enables is far larger than that. You're able to interact with a store, but also you're able to hold funds on users. Users can transact inside of that economy, inside of that game freely. This, entirely up to you as the developer. And you can have as many ins and outs as you want, right? The end users are the ones that decide. So as a developer, I operate in Europe. Therefore, my bank, balances and treasuries are all in euros. That's great, but I have users in Brazil, gamers in Brazil, gamers in US, and gamers in Japan. Those gamers don't interact with euros. They interact with dollars or reais or Bitcoin and stable coins and so forth. So ZBD abstracts all of that out. Game developers get to focus on the game, the experience, the user, the activity and the engagement inside of that game. And they don't have to worry about the nuances of being a regulated service provider, to handle compliance, to handle things like KYC and so on, and issuance of banking cards and all of that. So ZBD is coming in with a very different approach to the industry. And we believe that the gaming industry is just the first of many pillars that will, that ZBD will conquer. And I really believe that gaming is the first pillar given a few properties. One, the gamers are inherently internet native. Gaming is digital, so they're more familiar with games, with points, with digital value. They are much closer to new items and technology, so it's not foreign to them. Bitcoin can be seen sometimes as a bucket of crypto, as a, not interested, scammy, etc. This user base is not. And nowadays, there's, billions and billions of games and apps at the app stores, right? If you look at the app stores for iOS and Android, it's roughly 2/3 of revenue for both of those app stores are game related revenue, right? And so the iOS app store should really be called Game Store. And that's why it's called the Google Play Store, because it's predominantly games. So that's what drives both of those markets. So ZBD comes in to provide a unified interface. You come in, you plug what you need, and you let your users plug in their end point on the other side. We abstract all complexity, and we operate in the biggest markets that you probably have gamers on. So that's a little bit of how we tackle the problem, and we're bringing gaming industry into the 22nd century, I guess.
Lynn and I are partners at Base Layer Advisors, where we use our network of venture capital partners and startup founders to connect investors with unique opportunities within the Bitcoin innovation space. Alongside this, we help startup founders with their growth and fundraising. Visit our website's advisory section to learn more.
Build with Bitcoin is a proud affiliate partner of River,
River is a financial services company that allows you to purchase, sell, and transfer your Bitcoin all through a great suite of products, high security standards, and as of recent, even allowing you to earn a Bitcoin yield on your US dollar cash deposits. For a personalized onboarding experience, go to partner.river.com/buildwithbitcoin.
It's fascinating because talking about how really kind of tech first the whole gaming industry is. I mean, even when the internet evolved, it was like gamers were leading it, gaming, certain parts of entertainment, music, and the same thing, I think, with usage of Bitcoin too. But the fact that they had such antiquated payment concepts is such a interesting disconnect. When you look at how gaming can push other industries, as you look to other markets, what is the kind of the roadmap of where you want to go? And then my question that I forgot to ask, first of all, is you, Simon, Chris, are you guys gamers? Did you kind of come to this because of gaming or because you knew that gamers were tech sophisticated that could perhaps, that you were feeling a need for this?
Yeah, so Chris, myself, and Simon are definitely gamers in different ways, shapes, and flavors. Chris is definitely the heaviest gamer of all. And being a game developer himself, he lives and breathes gaming. But even in the early days of ZBD, we were all, getting together at night on game night, playing Age of Empires 2 for hours and hours and hours. And that was the fun. So we worked. And then for having fun, we played games, right? And we've been a remote company since day one. Both of my co-founders are in Europe and UK, and I'm over here in the US. So ever since the very beginning, gaming has been sort of like this joining point for everyone, right? It's this community, and we don't have the ability to bump into each other in an office, and discuss different non-work related things. And so gaming was that really, that space where we found that. So we are still gamers. Although there's a lot of work being done at this point. But yes, we're very much gamers. What was the first question? I apologize.
Well, and then the other part of that was, so do you see gaming being kind of a gateway into other, and what does that path look like for you three?
So 2 parts to that question. I think the first one is, when we talk about gamers, we're talking about the 3 billion or so odd gamers out in the world. That's like a heavy chunk of the entire planet. But if you really look at the, 3 billion or so, a good, maybe 2/3 of those are mobile gamers. And what we're talking about, it's not the gamer with the hood, in the dark playing at night. It's like we're talking about the person, playing on the phone and Candy Crush style games and so forth. So the mobile gaming industry is very, very large. And so immediately we thought, let's attack that market first. Let's solve their problems and provide capabilities for them. The industry has been facing big challenges around privacy concerns, user acquisition challenges, and just general growth. A lot of publishers have been focusing on fewer titles instead of the breadth of titles. And so we come in with solutions. The current first one, ZBD Earn, provides them full capabilities to reward and engage the user in these environments of gaming, right? So the mobile gaming. So whether it's a trigger or whether it's time-based or whether you beat the big boss, you can interact with the user in a rewarded fashion. Gaming to us is akin to like a Trojan horse. When someone's playing a game, you don't really think of the fact, to your point, like they're native to the internet, they understand points. A lot of them don't even understand that they're earning Bitcoin until they do. And then they earn Bitcoin and they come to us on our public Discord and say, hey, how do I trade my stats? Right? Because to them, it's points. It's not yet Bitcoin. And then they go through that learning process. And to this point, we're processing 120 plus million transactions on a yearly basis. So I have single-handedly onboarded millions and millions of people into Bitcoin without them even thinking about it being Bitcoin or without seeing it as an investment, right? It's a risk-free way of interacting with this new money. And so gaming is the first vertical. We see ZBD as an embedded provider. What that means is we want to be on the fabric of your experience. We don't want to be, a web store that's adjacent to your game. We want to be the game provider inside of your game or your application. And so we see gaming as the first of a larger pillar of interactive entertainment. So you can sort of imagine music, you can imagine podcasting, you can imagine streaming, and all of these are adjacent to gaming and real-time live interactions online. We believe Bitcoin and Lightning is the best technology for this type of money movement. So we think gaming is the first of the many industries that we'll tackle.
You mentioned earlier that 2/3 of the iOS and Play revenues come from gaming. I had no idea. That's a pretty impressive stat. I'd like to kind of unpack some of these things because what you're doing is actually fascinating. So the benefits of what Lightning and Bitcoin offer within an industry like gaming. I think the main or obvious reason, perhaps, is that it's a global currency, right? I mean, you avoid having to swap between, you were talking about the Japan, Brazil, Europe example. So you're avoiding a lot of this intercurrency friction and, of course, all the high costs and intermediation that comes with that. So you're starting with just internet native global currency. And then on top of that, the actual economic cost of transacting is multitudes cheaper, right, than traditional fiat. So can you unpack a little bit of what Lightning as a technology provides as far as these instant micro or nano payments for a globally native currency like Bitcoin?
Yeah. I mean, you hit it spot on two of the big items. So I would say the cost is, it's either revenue or it's cost reduction when it comes from a business sense. So, the way we see Lightning is it's the better technology for that use case. Money movement in a global sense, just requires a native internet currency. And that's Lightning for us. And that's the fastest and cheapest way. We're talking about sub-cent transactions, right? When an example, so one of the big games that are in the platform, Idle Bank, the other one is Bitcoin Miner. So these are all games, mobile games that reward users. And the biggest reward transaction is something like 100 Satoshis, 500 Satoshis. We're talking about minuscule transactions. You simply can't do these transactions in regular fiat rails. This is infeasible, not just from the cost basis, but, in general, I feel like intermediaries wouldn't accept such a low transaction value. So you immediately cut off an entire set of use cases that could exist, right? And in a world of on-demand 24/7, the second part that I would add is the instantaneity, the instant settlement of Lightning brings in quite a bit to the playing field. So we're used to, 30-day chargebacks. We're used to credit cards and fraud. We're used to all of the aspects of having, a debt-based money instruments. And so with Bitcoin, the money movement is final. And at that exact instant, I beat the big boss and I receive my reward. That is money that's spendable from wherever I want. That's value that I've generated, and I can then go on use it on, wherever I want. So that's definitely one. But I think Bitcoin and Lightning is, it's sort of like additive to the experience, right? I don't think we should see it as solves all problems, period, and done. I think Lightning is the best technology that we have for this use case of on-demand 24/7 global technology for money movement. And I think it serves that purpose exactly. So if I'm a gamer in Brazil, a developer in Europe, I have users in India or Japan, Bitcoin solves that purpose. But also Bitcoin is such a, adopted technology at this point that every currency, every country and currency in the world has many, whether it's peer-to-peer or not, ways of transacting Bitcoin to other currencies, right? So whether you do that through ZBD or whether you do that yourself by receiving your rewards or receiving your payouts from your game and then interacting with Bitcoin on your favorite exchange or neobank or whatever store you want, to take into account, you have these Roblox creators that are making tens of millions of dollars on a monthly basis creating Roblox games and interacting with users. All of that could be generating 10 times more economic activity if the money was part of the game and not just on the edges of the game. And so Lightning really allows you to bake into what I was saying, the fabric aspect of the game. It's real code, right? Bitcoin turned money into data, and then Lightning turned it into something that can move at internet speed and with final settlement. So Lightning is really that glue for us.
Can you just take our listeners through kind of amplifying it beyond gaming when you're talking about sub-cent transactions,
Sure.
where else that might go. I mean, I'm thinking, I mean, I'd love to, I have ideas, but I'd love to hear yours. Like, what other applications can this change?
Yeah. So gaming, like you said, first example. The second one I would say that's very close to people's day to day, like they do this on a daily basis, is, for example, podcasts, right? So everyone listens to podcasts, and the podcasting model is an ad driven model. So you start the podcast and it's about like 10 minutes of ads, or they sprinkle it into the middle. And, that's a model that can be done, but you could also have the scenario where it's listener supported model. And you have these with Patreon types of platforms. But again, those are sort of not part of the experience, right? You're sort of going to a separate website, interacting with a separate brand under a separate name. And so that's not part of the fabric of the experience. And so we have a partner called Fountain, where what they've done is it's akin to any podcasting app that you have. It's actually, you don't even need to use Bitcoin if you don't want to. It's a very, very good podcasting app. But what it does is it has Bitcoin built in, and they use ZBD infrastructure. So you can have your own Bitcoin wallet as a listener. You can top up with cards, etc., if you want, and you can support your, favorite podcasters. And you're thinking, okay, maybe I can give them $1, $5, etc. That's fine. You could do that. But what's revolutionary is the new things you can do. So there's a pay sort of support while you listen. So every second that you're listening, or every 5 seconds that you're listening, behind the scenes, your Bitcoin wallet is sending money and what we call streaming money to the podcaster. So it's really just on that pay-per-use, pay-per-support model. I think this is going to happen to everything music as well. We're seeing this with partners like Wavelake. Fountain is stepping into this. Notoriously, you have very famous artists that have billions and billions of listens on Spotify and go out on social media to say that they've made $1,000 with this, right? So we have people who are indie artists deploying this to services like Fountain, like Wavelake, and earning, $100 from random people around the world. And this was impossible before. And this is where I really tried to hone in. And yes, we can make the experience better with Bitcoin, but it's actually about doing the novel things that, a legacy money rail does not even enable. So streaming money is very much that. If I can stream money as I listen to my podcast, my creator, multiply that by 100,000 people listening at all times, and you can see how Lightning enables money to just always be moving, right? It's never stopped, right? The value is always moving. So that's another use case that's probably a bit closer to people, right? Because everyone listens to podcasts.
If you expand that further, it could break subscription models. So instead of paying $20 a month for music, for Netflix, for software, basically anything could be converted into a streaming model where you only pay for what you actually consume.
And this is actually something that we've seen in the early days of 2010s of cloud. So cloud storage went and cloud compute went into pay as you go kind of. So every second, every minute of compute is what you pay at the end of the year, the month. We're now moving into AI and tokens, right? So it's based on the token usage. So you have a subscription, but you can also just pay per use, right? That little bit that you use, that's what you're paying for. I think that's the future. So if I want to watch 5 episodes of Netflix, I don't need to pay all this money. I need to pay for the content that I've received, right? So I think we're going to see new pricing mechanisms and models evolve from that.
We're actually testaments to some of the points you were making earlier. We use Fountain for our hosting services, and we have received sats from listeners for some of our content. So, we can definitely speak a little bit to what you're mentioning there, André. And yeah, I mean, to me, that's one of the most fascinating parts about what the Bitcoin economy is going to unlock, is precisely what you hit on. The creator economy is just going to explode because a few of the points you mentioned, and of course of money that can't be diluted away. So it's fascinating. The micro, nano instant payments unlock. I think most of it we haven't even seen yet. We're probably in the just, peeling off the first layer of the onion there. Let's get using that into another topic that we want to make sure we touch on, which is directly related, being AI agents and their use of Bitcoin and, of course, the Lightning rails. We've seen some interesting activity in the first few weeks of 2026, at least in many popular social media channels and applications. There's been a lot of increased buzz on exponential growth of AI agents. I'm not sure what the current statistic of growth is, but we know it's definitely, it's curving quickly upwards, right? So on that topic, you guys, and this I believe was last year, if I'm not mistaken, you released your MCP, your Model Context Protocol server. Is that right? That lets AI agents interact with ZBD payment APIs. So first, setting the stage, why did you guys pretty early on, 2025, already developed something for AI agents? I mean, you clearly see this as a strategic vision for what you're developing. What was your thought process maybe launching this MCP, Andre? Let's start there.
So, in my entire career, completely changed over the last 3 years. I think software engineering and development has dramatically changed, and sort of denying this is a fool's errand. You have to accept that things are progressing and moving. We are abstracting away parts of software engineering. Developers aren't going anywhere, but we may not need to do the super low level items that we currently do. 3 years ago, I still wrote all of my code by hand, and I'm happy to say that 99.9% of my code now, although gets reviewed by me, is not written by hand. And so in early 2020, late 2024, early 2025, internally at ZBD, we've set out big policies for AI usage, internally for, efficiency gains and improvements around personnel and communications and velocity and so forth. I'm a technologist, entrepreneur, builder, and so I always try to stay ahead of the curve. We're building sort of cutting edge of money, so I'm also interested in cutting edge of general other industries. MCP came out, late, some point in 2025, beginning 2025, I think. And it's basically a standard that allows AI agents to interact with said tool, right? So if your tool has an MCP interface, then, Claude or OpenAI can talk to it. Let's simplify it that way. And so immediately as the protocol started taking shape, I recognized the value of sort of following the standardization. As someone who's worked on Bitcoin is a protocol, right? And Lightning is nothing more than a protocol, and Lightning address is a protocol. And so there can be many, many, many protocols, but protocols that have convergence in standardization can go very far and are very, very powerful. MCP provides interoperability. And if we're moving into a world where agents and sub-agents are doing most things, so when you Google something, you're not really Googling anymore. There's a bunch of sub-agents that are getting kicked off. They're searching through many more instances than you could as a human, and then bringing back better results. So it became clear that we had to have an answer for that. If we're going to be the payment processor of games, the payment processor of interactive entertainment, the payment processor of digital interactions, we need to be AI first. And that doesn't mean just, here's an MCP server. That was the first of many things that are going to be coming down the pipeline. We were the first one to roll out an MCP server for Bitcoin and Lightning that allows your OpenAI and Claude to pay Lightning invoices. We know of game developers using this to, like I said earlier in the conversation, to kick off hundreds of payouts to their users and gamers, right? So this used to be toil, and it's now being, sort of optimized. And this is just the beginning. The thing that I really come back to is, in a world where we have legacy infrastructure for payments and for money, an agent is not an individual with a bank account. An agent is not an individual with an ID, a social security number in the US, or any other sort of identification, right? So it has to use digitally native primitives, and the primitive for money is Bitcoin, right? So agents are going to be using Bitcoin regardless. You can even go and ask ChatGPT right now, and it'll tell you that Bitcoin is the better option for them, because it is a decentralized native internet currency. So AI is something that we, from sort of like as a big umbrella, is something that we hold very dear in terms of efficiency at ZBD. And then as it comes to being at the forefront of the usability of AI agents with our tool, I mean, we've seen massive growth on some of these tools that are leveraging, AI capabilities, and, it's night and day. You reach some level of virality and it's night and day. I don't know how closely you guys are following it, but the open claw, discussions right now, it's fascinating. And a lot of it is noise. A lot of it is interesting, but, being able to give my agent a Bitcoin wallet is amazing, right? Soon enough, it's going to be buying things for me, and it can't do that because it doesn't have a bank account, right? So we do believe that there's a lot more to come from this, and I expect putting this together with the pricing, right? So if you can do things per use, then agents can pay each other per use. So if you want to use a database, maybe you're just paying per the usage of that compute behind the scenes. And so money is being streamed everywhere. I think AI brings streaming money to the forefront because it's just going to be moving all the time.
This is something that I find fascinating and do a lot of thinking about it. And I'd love to get your big vision about the intersection of Bitcoin, AI, and Lightning. We talk about, in Bitcoin, medium of exchange versus store of value, and medium of exchange has its challenges. But could you envision where AI agents are actually kind of surpass human medium of exchange? Could that be the use case that we've been kind of looking for?
Yeah.
How do you view this evolution?
That's an interesting thought, because Bitcoin moving from store of value mentality to a medium of exchange and sort of everyday money that you can use for payments requires, the overwhelming majority over time moving into that understanding. It won't happen from one day to the next. And then you have countries where the money debases much faster than others. And so it's actually better to keep Bitcoin. In other countries, it's worse. There is a very real chance that, the sheer number of economic interactions that agents can and will do. Like, for example, you spin up any number of tens to hundreds to thousands of agents on a daily basis, right, to do various tasks. If there's economic value in each of these tasks, one individual doesn't do 1,000 transactions on a daily basis, right? You don't. You make a few transactions on a credit card potentially. Agents will do tens of thousands on a daily basis, right? So there's a real potential that if there's a wide adoption by, so-called agents around the world and tooling built to give them Bitcoin and Lightning capabilities, I mean, it's easy to see that it could dwarf the activity that, humans bring to the Lightning Network. One use case, for example, we don't talk a lot about games. Like, games have tens to hundreds of millions of monthly active users, right? And we sort of put that away. Like, we're processing 120 million transactions on a yearly basis. That is a lot, but it is nothing, right? Compared to where we need to be. We need to be processing billions and billions of transactions every month. If agents are coming, and that's humans playing games. If agents are coming in, ZBD needs to be processing trillions of transactions every year. So I do think they could sort of dwarf usage of humans on Lightning. It's an interesting thought experiment.
And then even opening it up to technology, and people talk a lot about financial inclusion, that there's a disconnect in different parts of the world with the ability to actually be a part of the financial system. And probably the same can be said of being part of this AI advancement. But if you have the ability to, where you don't have to put down a credit card and get a subscription to one of these tools, and you can just pay with small amounts that you might earn from gaming, that you can then access technology advancements that weren't available to you before. So how do you, I mean, when you talked about the three of you first starting this company and creating a world that was bigger and better and just kind of moving off of it, how do you think about this in terms of bringing opportunities to different places through gaming?
Yeah, I think the key points there on the technical side is interoperability. I think that's vital, right? I can have dollars, but if I go to Brazil, I can't use them. So the interoperability of Bitcoin is massive here. And then you couple that with what I was saying earlier, different currencies, right? Currencies are managed by central banks. Central banks are humans with wants, needs, desires, and it doesn't always plan out as it's wanted to. So in a world where we have Lightning, what we've seen as early as 2021, when we ran the Infuse product back in the day, this was an activation where we modded Counter-Strike, the first-person shooter game, and we introduced Bitcoin, actual physical coins in the game, and people could shoot each other and get coins and points and etc. And it was all Bitcoin, at the end of the day. So you finish the match, you would receive your payout automatically and immediately. We had lots and lots of players in Brazil, and we know this is still the case, but that was a pretty big example for us where the community in Brazil started participating religiously in all of these events that we were throwing, because some of them would go on the weekends and would take photos of them buying groceries with the earnings from playing Counter-Strike this week. Right. And the other one went to the pharmacy and bought something. Right. And this is sort of organic, people coming in and sharing like, hey, this is real. I've spent time on this. It's a great experience. I got value from it, and that value is interoperable, and I can use that value elsewhere. As early as 2020, we started seeing this, and it has continued since then. We have a large user base in Brazil, and even in other countries in Europe and the US, we see that, again, to a lesser degree, just based on the currency conversion. But it's very powerful. I think the fact that your money here is the same money anywhere else in the world is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on something I think extremely important, Andre, because you guys are tapping into an adoption funnel that it's tough. I mean, anyone who's been in Bitcoin knows that it's not easy to try to explain it or convince someone that it's worth your time. It's a bit of a leap to get to someone to go out and proactively buy or purchase Bitcoin, right? Or, sell their services or products for Bitcoin. I mean, for those verticals, I mean, you have to convince that person that person has to understand that it's a better money, that, that it kind of untaps this global economy. And the way you guys are approaching this, I mean, to me, that's perhaps the most fascinating aspect of what ZBD is doing is you're on-ramping, all these millions of users through the gaming approach. But I mean, I think the power of Bitcoin only comes when you've actually first used it, right? I mean, you can read as much as you want about it. You can understand how it might fit into a portfolio, the investment side, the store of value side. But until you actually use Bitcoin for the first time in a transaction, and even more powerful if it's a global transaction, I think that's a pretty magical and special moment for people. And of course, we're well aware of Bitcoin's benefits and how much of a better world we believe it will be when more people migrate to that monetary system and economy. And you guys are on-ramping first-time users in a very creative and neat way. So, yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually the simplest way that I try to explain it. It's games that integrate ZBD give away Bitcoin, right? That's the simplest way to get it. And people, I don't understand. I'm like, no, this is our business. Flipped it upside down, right? People see Bitcoin as an investment. That's already a mega friction level to seeing it as anything else other than an investment. And if the price moves, then, it's on me, whether I buy or lose or sell or so on. The way you do it where Bitcoin is a risk-free asset or something that you're not risking to get. So you're not coming to a ZBD experience and putting $5 in. You're putting your time, you're putting yourself, you're part of that experience, and you're getting some value out of that. So I think that the crux there that I agree 100%. And I would say the big item there is being able to use it in a way where it's not purchased. So for us to migrate into a medium of exchange world where Bitcoin is actually seen as money, people need to earn it. If you earn it, you're willing to spend it. If you're not spending it, this isn't a current, it's a money that stores value, and that's perfectly fine if that's what it is. But then it's not a payments money, and it's not a payments currency. So when people earn it, they're willing to spend it. If I'm buying something, I'm only willing to spend it if the spending delta is higher than what I paid for, right? And that's the disconnect. So we don't onboard people through an exchange method, right? Buying Bitcoin or so on. We onboard you, the Trojan horse mentality, through a game. And suddenly you're 3 steps down the ladder of a Bitcoin rabbit hole, and you don't even know, right? And so that's the key aspect that I think gaming brings in. And to your point, like around the selling of Bitcoin. In 2019, when we kicked off in early 2020, we're talking about the crypto winters, the downs of the markets. And we actually have been fortunate enough to find ourselves attached to an industry that isn't as cyclical as something like a Bitcoin or crypto market, right? You have big wins and big downs and big ups and big downs. Gamers are here, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The day is good, the day is bad. People are playing games. And so we are fortunate enough to be tapping into an industry that doesn't fluctuate as much and as wildly as something like the Bitcoin market. But we've had to learn how to better sell this technology. And of course, we're not selling it as you put Bitcoin in your game or, hey, Bitcoin is better because of this. No, we bring you the capability. So through ZBD products, you can improve engagement. You can improve lifetime value of your customers, of your gamers. You can improve retention, etc. You can do triggered rewarded payouts and so on. And that then they come into understanding this is very, very big value prop for my business. I see the revenue potential, the gains potential, the reduction in costs. How do you guys do it? Behind the scenes, oh, it uses Bitcoin. Okay, that's fine. So internally, we call it invisible Bitcoin. You can see Bitcoin if you want to, and you can show your users Bitcoin, but you can show them whatever else you want, even though it is Bitcoin behind the scenes, right? So that's a really powerful piece. And ZBD is moving in a direction where we are multi-currency. So although Bitcoin is first and, native to what we do, and behind the scenes, it's predominantly mostly Bitcoin, we are in the process of rolling out things relating to cards, things relating to, Apple Pay and Google Pay, relating to top-ups and withdrawals. So you will be able to come in as a gamer, top up your game with whatever money you may have. Internally in the game, it could be whatever currency in the game, but behind the scenes, it's all powered by Bitcoin. And at the end of it, if you want to cash out to your card, if you want to cash out to Bitcoin, if you want to cash out to a gift card, that's entirely up to you. So the interoperability of Lightning is what enables any and all of this.
André, you had me worried for a second when you said multi-currency, and I wanted to just
No.
I have to ask the question though. I mean, because I think it's important. Not that you or I actually are thinking this question, but why are you Bitcoin focused, Bitcoin only? Why not open it up to other quote unquote cryptos? And how do you answer that question when a potential investor, somebody asks you that, but because you are Bitcoin only?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'll say is you have to find like-minded, strategic investors, first of all. But I hear you when why not just adopt everything? I think it's more about, there's the ethical part of it, which I think is a little bit, but it's not really the business reason for it. I think it's the longevity of the business. The way I really think about it is I'm trying to build a business that will be here for the long haul. I don't necessarily just want to build something that spikes with a fad and then dies out in a year's time. Could we roll out other stuff? Sure. It doesn't drive any technological merit. It's not better for the user's use case, for the gamer's use case. It doesn't bring any of these benefits. So again, Lightning and Bitcoin continues to be just the best technology for it, and until there's a better technology for it, we're unlikely to entertain it in the way that could, be placed next to Bitcoin. Although I will say, Israel said in the beginning, it's hard when you are trying to stay Bitcoin only, as we call it, and the market pushes you in different directions and so on. ZBD we term it anti-fragile. Like we've been able to weather multiple of these downturns on market, have been successful in fundraising, the most in the industry. And so I think we've taken the right steps to mitigate anything relating to being Bitcoin only, but we see this, we provide solutions for our customers. And I can tell you, no one is asking for the other stuff. Back in the day, someone would say NFTs because it was the fad of the moment, right? That has died out. No one is talking about it. And a lot of people have actually come back and said, hey, when we talked in 2022, you were right. Let's do business together, right? So it just, the industry took a little bit of time to come to conclusions, but it hasn't been a challenge for us to remain Bitcoin only because we listen to customers and the customers' demands aren't elsewhere. And I hope it continues that way, and we'll continue doing our best to nudge it in the best direction. All that we can do is push users to the best technology, right? And if it brings them the value that they want, that's the best we can do. And ZBD is here to provide that for gaming and the wider interactive entertainment.
Well, congrats on everything you guys have accomplished in these, I guess, 6 years, Andre.
Yes.
Fair to
Long
say
time.
it's still it's still early though for your vision of the company, I'm sure, and
Yes.
it's clear with how you just outlaid what you guys are thinking as far as a vision or strategic roadmap. And I mean, to that point, you guys have of course come a long way. You mentioned you're processing north of 120 million transactions yearly. I'm not sure what the count is. I believe maybe 50 something on gaming and integrations. If you can give us, a little more color on those metrics, but more importantly, what are you looking at internally as you plan 2026 forward for the company? I mean, what are some of the points that matter most to you guys? Is it stats and hearing concrete evidence that some of these providers are actually retaining more users? Is it expanding these integrations, expanding geographically, transaction volume? Where's the focus for ZBD going forward?
So we are a fully regulated institution in the US and Europe. And so that means we have the MTLs. We were actually the very first company in the world to get the MiCAR license in Europe last year. So we have these two big markets that are processing 120 million transactions. That's not everyone yet. So we have plenty of market to tap in those two. Specifically in Europe, there's, very different geographic segments of Europe that we want to tackle as well. So the focus is very much in these two tier one markets predominantly. I would say the Bitcoin and Lightning side of our infrastructure is incredibly robust. Since 2019, been building, I would argue, one of the most robust infrastructure for Lightning at this stage, powering 100+ million a year. So what we've been focusing on and what you'll see in 2026 and beyond is sort of this move into the interoperability layer between Bitcoin and everything else. So to your point, if a game developer has dollars, they don't want to interact with Bitcoin, they don't like Bitcoin, but they love everything about Bitcoin, the technology and how it provides all of the capabilities. That's great. We should be able to provide that to you. So, we're rolling out, as I mentioned, on and off ramps. We're rolling out things around cards. So you'll be able to have debit cards. You'll be able to take in debit cards. You'll be able to interact with the legacy financial system in a way that doesn't require you to have 12 different providers. So I have a provider in the US, a provider in Europe, a provider in Brazil, a provider over here. And each of those is for one currency in one country, right? And ZBD sort of comes in and says, no, we cover all of Europe and US in one go. And we provide you not only your legacy rails, which, that's fine. You need it because you're onboarding people, and you also get the new modern rails of Bitcoin and Lightning and so forth. So in the next few years, you'll see us materially step in there. We've recently did a case study on our Tap Nation game that got released. So Tap Nation is one of the biggest mobile publishers. I believe they have 60 million MAU across their portfolio of games. They just did an initial integration. The case study, I want to say that every case study of ours comes out to such large numbers and gains that people sometimes think they are fake numbers, but really they aren't. Like Tap Nation has seen triple-digit percentage gains in their ROAS and their daily retention. And so what we're seeing is we're really moving into that scale phase where we're moving from mid-sized studios to the large publishers. Tap Nation is the first one that's gone live. You'll be seeing quite a few more of those in the rest of this year. Goes on. And this is the next stage, right? We're talking about game size, 60 million monthly active users. I don't know the stats because it's almost infeasible to count, but I don't know that there are 60 million monthly active users of Bitcoin, right? Maybe there are, maybe there's 200, but that number isn't that giant, right? And we're talking about Call of Duty having 400 million, right? So we really need to bridge that gap. And I think ZBD is specifically poised to do that. And if we introduce Bitcoin and Lightning and these capabilities into the fabric of these mobile publishers, and then later on into mid-core game publishers on desktop and so on and console, you can see that how Bitcoin spreads like wildfire, right? And people start interacting with it without even knowing they're interacting with it. The power of a Lightning address is that it kind of looks just like an email, and you don't have to think too much about it. It's just an interface that allows me to receive and send Bitcoin. Great. We have some early prototypes and tests for expanding the Lightning address protocol to being a more robust multi-currency setup as well. So lots of exciting things coming down the pipeline in 2026.
We should point out the fact that you developed that protocol for Lightning addresses.
Yep.
Back in 2021. So you are a contributor to that. I mean, André, I have a question to ask as we start to wind down. I mean, and open source has been important to you, and the Lightning protocol and Bitcoin and even MCP, it's like you still contribute a lot to it. You said you don't have time to game as much with your co-founders, but you still are really, really active in contributing to open source. And why is that important to you? And what is your philosophy around open source? And how do you manage your time between what the needs are at ZBD and continuing to be an active part of this community?
Yeah. So, I think every developer sort of owes their part of their success to open source, the notion of open source software, because no one's writing everything from scratch anymore. I'm importing packages, I'm reusing libraries. I'm using open source software to build my commercial system on top of, right? So, from the earliest days of me breaking CPU computers because I didn't really know how to code as a kid and pressing buttons, there's always been this notion of there's free and open software out there that you can use and you can read and you can learn. It was one of the tools that I used to actually learn how to code back in the day, was reading HTML pages, reading WordPress blogs and how the PHP text was written. So, I think that's open source has always been sort of near and dear. And then if you coupled that with Bitcoin, which, the notion of a money that isn't controlled by anyone and is open source, right? So open source money, I think that elevated my belief and understanding and expectations of what I need to do for open source. And open source is really big. It just means, supporting open source activities. I'm the co-founder of 21, which is a nonprofit in Brazil where we support Bitcoin Core developers. So we're directly deploying capital to open source development. We at ZBD have worked with NBD and other open source developers. Fiat Jaff, the creator of Nostr, was working at ZBD when he created Nostr. Lots of LNURL related things happened under the ZBD umbrella. So this is all with the intent of providing what I mentioned earlier, like there's a lot of power in standards, but if everyone has their own standard, it's all useless, right? And so my goal, even with the Lightning address, was we have these building blocks. We have Bitcoin, which is built on cryptography, proof of work, all this stuff. And then we have Lightning, which is built on Bitcoin and a variety of other things. So the Lightning address was just another little block on top. And it was Lightning is confusing. QR codes are okay. I don't understand this huge string of characters. What if we were just to follow a cash tag, Venmo tag scenario? Everyone has a username. Let's just follow that along. And so suddenly we reinvented how people send and receive Lightning payments. So I think open source is the name of the game. I will continue to support it. In terms of my own time, you try to fit it in the half an hour between lunch and your next meeting. I will say that over the last 3 years, there's the term like the 10x engineer, right? This is a term that's been, in the industry forever. I think, very much now I'm arguably a 100x engineer, right? I have never been more efficient and capable given all of these AI tooling and capabilities. I'm able to write any code in any language, even though I don't speak said language, right? So I've become quite a bit more dangerous as a developer. And because of that, I'm able to attack other open source challenges that I've always wanted to attack, but I haven't been able to. So weekends and late nights is how it gets done.
Well, thanks for the time today, Andre. I mean, it's a fascinating story. I didn't know, by the way, that the Nostr creator came from the ZBD umbrella.
Yeah. He was our very first open source full-time developer, and he actually didn't have a software engineering role at all. It was just a tinkerer. And I was like, hey, let's work together. And this was in 2020, beginning of 2020. And he actually stayed with ZBD for 4 years doing all open source stuff on Lightning. And then when Nostr picked up steam and Jack Dorsey came into the picture, he said, hey, I need to focus on this full time. And so we said, all right, it's been a journey.
Fascinating, fascinating. Well, I mean, Andre, as we wind down, as Lynn was mentioning, can you give us a quick snapshot of the size of the team, if you guys are hiring, or maybe game publishers? Well, who are you interested in speaking to, and how can they get in touch?
Definitely. So we're fully remote, 70 people strong, I believe now, predominantly US and Europe, as I mentioned. We partner with game developers, game platforms, and publishers and try to solve their needs with the technology. At the moment, the biggest one that is public is Tap Nation that I can mention, but very, very soon there's going to be even more sizable ones to be announced. Stay tuned for that. You can see all this information on zbdpay.com or on our, ZBDpay Twitter. But really, the idea is that we want to remove complexity. We've been 6 years in this business, in this industry, which is equal to maybe 50 years in real life. And we've been able to abstract away all of the complexities of this new modern way of dealing with money. And we would love to provide that to you so you can be at the forefront of that. If you're a game developer, a publisher, you work with anyone in that industry or that space, please reach out so we can, increase revenue, increase retention, and reduce your costs for your business and for your games.
Thanks so much. I feel bad that we've taken an hour away from open source development, but to have you on, but hopefully I'm sure our listeners will get as much out of this as Israel and I have. I mean, it's been a fantastic conversation. Absolutely love what you're doing. And I'm sure that we'll have future conversations because we want to follow more about what ZBD and what you're up to individually on the tech side.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Lynn, Israel. This was a great chat. It's exciting because I can go on for hours and hours, and sometimes I do with my friends, and they, so slow down, Andre, slow down. But the passion really comes through, and I think that's what, entrepreneurs in this space really need. You need a passion to want to change the world and then actually go and do it. So happy to come and join you again for another conversation in the future. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Andre. We'll be following ZBD's progress.